Dust clung to his uniform like a second skin, and the heat pressed down on his shoulders like the weight of memory. The soldier kept one hand near his weapon and the other loose by his side, ready to signal or steady himself if needed. His canine partner Rex walked just ahead, muscles tense, nose twitching, ears scanning every shift in the wind. They had been on patrol for hours, and the road behind them held only silence, and the road ahead felt like a question waiting to be answered. The village they entered looked abandoned, but the kind of abandoned that screamed danger, not peace, the kind where toys lay in the dirt untouched and doorways yawned open like mouths mid-scream. The soldier whispered to Rex, more out of habit than necessity, a single word: easy, and the dog slowed his pace, eyes sharp as broken glass. This was not their first time moving through a place that had seen too much. This was not their first time hoping they were not too late. Shadows stretched from broken homes like long arms, and glass glittered in patches of sun where windows used to be. There were scorch marks along the walls and bullet holes like tiny open mouths speaking the language of violence. Rex paused suddenly, his paw frozen mid-step and his head cocked toward a narrow alley. The soldier raised his hand, open palm, weight. His own breath slowed as he listened, really listened, not just to the quiet, but to the shape of it, the way it settled around him like a blanket pulled too tight. Then came the sound. Soft, so soft it could have been the wind brushing through dead leaves, but it wasn't. It was a voice, small and shaking, almost like it wasn't meant to be heard. Rex turned slowly, and the soldier followed his gaze to the edge of a fallen fence, where a flash of movement caught his eye. Not fast, not aggressive, just something small, something scared. He moved with caution, weapon raised, but not aiming, steps calculated and slow, like each one was a word in a sentence that had to be said perfectly. He rounded the corner and saw Hera, girl crouched in the dust, barefoot, knees pulled to her chest, her dress torn, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold all the broken pieces, and her eyes met his, and for a second neither moved. She looked like a ghost, like something the world had forgotten to bury, but her eyes were alive, too alive, and full of something that felt like a scream just waiting to escape. Rex stayed still, but alert, his gaze locked on her tail, barely flicking. His instincts were sharp, but the soldier gave no command. Instead, he knelt slowly, resting the edge of his hand against the ground, showing her he was not there to harm, only to help. And just then, barely above a whisper, she spoke, her voice dry and cracked and full of fear. She said, please. The soldier leaned in, ears straining, heart thudding loud enough he was sure she could hear it too. And again she said it, but this time with more weight, more meaning, more fear. Please don't let my brother die. The soldier froze for just a second as the weight of her words settled into his chest like a stone tossed into deep water. The world around them seemed to vanish. No more scorched walls, no more broken glass, just the girl, just the plea, and the heat of the moment pressing down like the sun itself. Had stopped to listen. She looked no older than 7. Dirt streaked across her cheeks, a cut on her forehead already crusting with dried blood. Her hands were trembling and her knees were scraped raw. Her eyes stayed locked on his like they were the only anchor she had left, and the soldier knew he could not let that anchor break. Where is he? The soldier asked, his voice low and steady, and the girl lifted one hand, pointing toward the collapsed corner of the school building just beyond the courtyard. Her lips moved again, but the words were barely sound, trapped in fear and dust. Rex moved first, as if the moment had finally given him permission. His body glided forward without hesitation, muscles shifting with purpose, his nose to the ground, his tail stiff like a flag in a silent storm. The soldier followed close behind, rifle at the ready, but mind racing. The courtyard was a battlefield of silence, desks, shattered books, torn pages fluttering in the hot wind. A basketball lay still in the dirt like a forgotten dream, and the building itself loomed ahead like the remains of something that had once tried to protect and failed. As they neared the rubble, Rex stopped and barked once, sharp and commanding, then began to dig with his front paws, fast and focused, dirt and debris flying behind him like a machine fueled by instinct. The soldier dropped to his knees beside him, scanning the rubble for gaps, listening for anything that might sound like a human breath, a human cry, anything at all. He called out, boy, can you hear me? This is the army. We are here to help. Stay still if you can, make noise if you can't. But nothing came back, only the sound of Rex digging, and the girl behind them beginning to cry. She stood at a distance, hugging herself, swaying slightly, as if the earth beneath her had never quite stopped shaking. The soldier wanted to reach out to her, to say something, anything, but the urgency of the moment kept his hands in the rubble and his heart in his throat. Suddenly a sound came, not loud, but enough to stop Rex mid-dig, a muffled cough, like someone breathing through a wall of dirt. The soldier leaned in, pressing his ear to the gap between stones, and there it was again, a breath, a whisper of life. He called in coordinates on his radio, voice clipped and direct, requesting medics, extraction gear, everything they had. He looked back at the girl and gave her the only thing he could in that moment, a nod, slow and sure. We found him, he said, and though she did not move, he saw her lips form a word not spoken, but felt, thank you. The soldier pressed his hand deeper into the rubble, trying to find an opening, something he could use to pull the stones away without making the collapse worse. Rex stood beside him, ears flat against his head, eyes fixed on the space between the Slabs, his body tense like he knew every second mattered. The boy was in there somewhere, and he was alive, but that could change at any moment. The ground was unstable, and the weight of the upper wall shifted every time the soldier moved a piece. The heat made sweat pour down his face, stinging his eyes, but he didn't stop. He radioed again, requesting immediate support, and marked the location with a smoke signal, green curling up into the sky like a desperate prayer. The little girl sat nearby, hugging her knees, her eyes never leaving the spot where her brother lay trapped, her lips moving silently like she was reciting a promise. Only she could hear. The soldier called out to the boy again, telling him to stay still, to hold on, to keep breathing. If he could hear him, Rex barked once sharply, then began to dig again, more carefully, this time using his snout to nudge small rocks out of the way. His training had kicked in, but this felt different, like he knew this wasn't just another drill. This was real, this was life and death. After several long minutes, the soldier reached in and felt something soft, not stone, not wood, skin. Warm and trembling, he had found the boy's arm pressed beneath a broken beam and coated in dust and blood. He felt for a pulse and found one, weak and slow, but there he shouted over his shoulder, telling the girl her brother was alive, and for the first time she moved. She scrambled forward on her knees, reaching for him as if her touch alone could save him, but the soldier raised his hand gently, telling her to wait, telling her to stay back just a little longer. Rex stood like a sentry between them, his body shielding the child, while his handler worked. The soldier whispered to the boy, told him help was coming, told him he wasn't alone, told him to keep fighting because someone was waiting for him, someone who had not stopped hoping. Dust filled his lungs and the rubble bit at his arms, but piece by piece he carved a path to the boy's chest, clearing just enough space for air, just enough room to ease the pressure off his ribs. The boy coughed again, weak but alive. He pulled a canteen from his pack, poured a few drops of water onto a cloth, and squeezed it into the boy's mouth. The child stirred barely, eyes fluttering open for a moment, enough to see, enough to know he was not abandoned. The sound of boots echoed in the courtyard. Finally the medics had arrived, gear in hand, faces hard with focus and urgency. They moved fast but carefully as the soldier backed away, allowing them room, his chest rising and falling with every breath like he had been holding it the whole time. The girl ran forward, tears falling into the dust, and wrapped her arms around her brother, who lay broken but breathing, and Rex sat beside them, silent and still, his job not done but his loyalty never shaken. The medics moved with urgency but not panic, their hands steady as they examined the boy, lifted the broken beam off his chest and placed a brace around his neck. The soldier watched closely, kneeling nearby, as dust coated his arms and sweat poured down the back of his neck. He could feel his heart slowing slightly, but his mind was still racing. The boy was alive, barely conscious, but alive, and that was more than he had expected. When he first heard the girl whisper her plea, Rex stood beside the little girl, who clung to her brother's hand as if she believed that touch alone could keep him breathing. The courtyard was quiet except for the voices of the medics and the wind brushing through the trees at the village edge like it was trying to remember what peace used to sound like. The soldier wiped his forehead with the back of his glove and looked around again, searching the buildings for movement, just in case. He knew too well that one rescue could turn into another firefight without warning, and that safety was never guaranteed even when the mission felt complete. But something in the air felt different now, like the ground itself had let out a breath. The boy was lifted onto a stretcher and secured with care, his face pale, his lips cracked, but he reached for his sister and she walked beside him, holding his hand like it was the only thread keeping her world from unraveling. The soldier followed them out across the rubble, the weight of his gear no longer heavy, just present, just there like it always was. They reached the evacuation point, a small clearing marked with smoke and bright cloth, where the medics called in the chopper. The wind picked up again, kicking dust into the sky, and the soldier shielded the girl's eyes with his hand just for a moment, just to give her 1 second where the world wasn't trying to blind her. Rex sat near the soldier, his eyes scanning the horizon, his body relaxed but ready, as if he too knew the danger had passed. But the mission wasn't over, not yet, not really. The girl looked up at the soldier and spoke again, her voice stronger than before but still soft. She asked if her brother would be okay, and he didn't answer right away. He looked at her, then at the boy, then back to her, and nodded, not because he knew for sure but because sometimes hope needed help. Standing up, the chopper arrived with a thunder that shook the ground and scattered debris across the courtyard. The medics loaded the boy and helped the girl climb inside, her fingers never letting go of his hand. The soldier stepped back, one hand resting on Rex's neck as the rotors roared above them. The girl looked at him from the open door, eyes wide and tired and grateful, and for a second he saw something in her face, something he hadn't seen in a long time, not just survival but belief. Then the chopper lifted and the sound faded, and all that was left was wind, dust, and the silence of a moment earned, not given. The wind finally calmed as the sound of the chopper faded into the sky, and the dust began to fall like slow rain, settling over the broken courtyard like a blanket trying to cover the wounds left behind. The soldier stood still, eyes fixed on the sky even after the helicopter disappeared beyond the hills, and the girl and her brother were only a memory carried by the wind. Rex sat beside him, ears perked, but body still, his breathing steady, his eyes calm but watchful. He nudged the soldier's leg once as if to say, "We did what we came to do," and the soldier reached down, resting his hand on the dog's head. For a moment of silence shared between two souls who had seen too much and said too little. He scanned the village again, the shattered school, the blackened walls, the playground that would never be used again, and something inside him stirred, not anger, not fear, just a quiet ache, a reminder that some places were not meant to hold laughter anymore. The radio crackled with a voice asking for a status update, and he answered clearly, voice flat but calm. "1 casualty rescued, 1 evac complete, area secure for now." He did not mention the girl's eyes, or the way her voice had cracked when she begged, or the way his hands were still shaking even though the danger was gone. They moved through the village again, clearing corners, checking shadows, retracing their steps not out of fear but discipline. Every alleyway checked, every doorway cleared, until the sun began to lower and the world around them turned gold with the light of coming night. Rex led the way, ears turning with every sound, but his steps slower now, like he too was tired, not in body but in spirit, the kind of tired that does not rest with sleep, the kind that sits behind the eyes and waits for the next mission, the next broken voice, the next child who needs more than a uniform and a gun. The soldier found a quiet place near a broken well and sat with his back against the stone, the sun falling behind him, painting the ruins in long shadows and soft firelight. Rex lay beside him, head on his paws, tail barely flicking, as if dreaming without sleep. He thought of the boy under the rubble, the weak cough, the trembling hand, the way his chest finally rose after air found him again. And then he thought of the girl, how she had watched without blinking, how she had believed without knowing, and how somehow that belief had become a kind of fuel that kept him digging when his arms were numb and his throat full of dust. He didn't know their names, and he probably never would, but their faces were now written into the silence behind his eyes, part of the weight he would carry long after this place was gone, long after the world moved on. And as the stars began to show above the shattered roofs, he whispered one word into the evening, not to the sky, not to Rex, not even to himself, just to the moment they had survived alive. The night came slowly, like a tide creeping over a quiet shore, the heat of the day fading into a heavy stillness that settled over the village like a thick blanket. The soldier did not sleep, not really. He leaned against the broken wall, eyes open, watching the stars above him scattered like shattered glass across a dark velvet sky. Rex shifted beside him once, then stilled again, breathing slow and deep but alert even in rest. The bond between them was unspoken but solid, like stone forged in fire, shaped by days just like this, where words were few and action meant everything. The soldier thought of the little girl, her hands shaking, her voice barely above silence yet somehow strong enough to pull him through rubble and smoke and fear. He remembered the way she had looked at him just before the chopper lifted away, like she was trying to memorize his face, like she knew that moment would stay with her forever, and maybe it would. He reached into his pack, pulled out a small notebook, and flipped past old pages, names, dates, coordinates, fragments of stories written in shorthand, a language only he understood. He paused, then slowly began to write, nothing fancy, just a few lines, just enough to mark the day. Child found, boy alive, extraction clean, no resistance, no contact, sister stayed until lift, eyes never left him, never let go. He closed the notebook and tucked it away, knowing the words were only for him, a way to remember, a way to keep some things from fading into dust. The village stayed quiet as the moon rose high, turning broken windows into mirrors and casting long pale shadows across the empty rooms. He walked through what remained of the school, stepping carefully over splintered wood and torn books, the air still thick with the scent of ash and old fear. He stopped by the place where the boy had been buried, where the little girl had knelt and whispered her plea. The ground was disturbed now, but quiet, no blood, no body, just memory pressed into the dirt like a footprint that would never be washed away. Rex followed him silently, nose low, ears turning with each distant sound, but never straying too far. The soldier paused, placed a hand on the dog's back, and looked out at the hills beyond the village, dark shapes under the stars hiding what came next, what always came next. Tomorrow there would be another patrol, another mission, another village with broken walls and voices too small to reach the world. But tonight they had done something more than survive. They had answered a cry, not with orders or strategy, but with heart, with hands, with the will to stay and dig and fight until one more life was pulled from the edge. The soldier sat again beside the broken well, and Rex lay next to him, tail against his boot. And together they watched the sky, saying nothing, needing nothing, just the stars, the silence, and the echo of a promise kept. The first light crept slowly over the horizon, painting the world in soft pale colors. The soldier was already awake, sitting quietly watching the sky change from black to blue, the village around him still asleep, or maybe too tired to wake, the air cool on his skin after the long heat of the day before. Rex was awake too, standing alert, eyes scanning the edges of the village, the dog's breath misted in the morning chill, as if even in sleep he had been guarding them from some unseen danger. The soldier admired that watchfulness, that loyalty, the way Rex never let his guard down even when everything seemed quiet. The soldier stood stretching muscles stiff from the night's vigil and looked down at Rex, scratching behind his ears, his friend responding with a soft whine and a wag of the tail like he understood the unspoken words between them, a conversation of trust and shared burdens. He thought again of the girl and her brother, the way fear had carved itself into their faces, but also the stubborn light that had refused to go out. The soldier had seen too many like them, children caught in the crossfire, innocent lives shattered by something they could not control. But today something had been different. Today hope had slipped through the cracks. He checked his gear methodically, no rush, but every movement precise like a ritual. The radio crackled to life, voice calm confirming the extraction had gone well and orders were to hold the area for a few more hours. A chance to regroup, to catch their breath, to prepare for what came next. The soldier nodded his understanding, then crouched down, speaking softly to Rex, telling him they would move soon, but for now they would rest a little longer. But even in those words was the knowledge that rest was temporary. A brief pause in a long fight. He walked to the edge of the village, looking out across the hills that rolled endlessly under the rising sun. The landscape was beautiful and cruel at the same time, a place that gave life but took it just as easily, a reminder of why they fought and why sometimes survival was victory enough. The soldier thought of home, the faces waiting there, the normal life that seemed so far away from this broken place. But even though he longed for that peace, he knew that here among the ruins and the whispers he found something else too, a purpose, a reason to keep going even when the nights were long and the days harder. Rex sat beside him, tail twitching, eyes fixed on the path ahead. The bond between them was more than training or duty. It was a silent promise, a shared understanding that no matter what came next, they would face it together. The sun climbed higher, warming their backs as the village slowly came alive. The soldier prepared to lead his partner and his team onward, knowing the road was still dangerous, but carrying with him the memory of a little girl's whispered plea and the sound of a breath beneath the rubble, a reminder that even in darkness there could be light. The soldier and Rex moved slowly through the village, their steps light but steady, the morning sun casting long shadows behind them as if the past still followed close but could no longer catch them. The streets were quiet, the ruins seeming to hold their breath, waiting for something new, something better. The girl and her brother were gone, now taken to safety, carried by hands that promised healing and shelter, but the soldier carried their story with him, etched deep inside like a scar he would not forget, a reminder of why he kept going. Rex paused at the edge of the courtyard, looking back once as if to say, this place holds more than broken walls, it holds lives, lives that must be remembered, lives that need someone to stand guard even when the battle is over. The soldier nodded and knelt down, scratching Rex behind the ears, a gesture simple but full of meaning between them. The dog gave a soft whine and pressed his head against the soldier's knee, a moment of connection. In a world that often made little room for softness, they moved on past the school, past the place where the boy had been trapped, the soldier's eyes lingering on the ground like he was trying to hold on to the memory of a small life clinging to hope beneath the rubble. The village behind them grew smaller as they walked toward the hills, the wind picking up, carrying dust and whispers and the faint sound of children's laughter somewhere far away, a promise of something waiting beyond the ruins. The soldier felt the weight of his gear less today, lighter somehow, like the burden of failure had lifted just a little bit, and the quiet ache in his chest softened into something like peace. He glanced down at Rex, whose eyes met his own, and in that glance was everything they had shared, the fear, the hope, the long lonely nights, and the small victories that made it all worth fighting for. The sun climbed higher, warming their backs, and the soldier allowed himself a brief smile, a rare thing in a place where smiles were currency and strength was survival. But this one was real because it came from the promise of tomorrow. They would keep moving forward, one step, one breath, one life at a time, because in the end it was not the war or the ruins or the danger that defined them, but the courage to keep believing that even the smallest voice could change everything.